Today we're going to talk about converting decimals to percents and percents back to decimals. Remember that decimals are parts of a whole. Well, percents are also parts of a whole. If you have 100%, you have a whole, but usually percents are less than 100%. So they're also parts of a whole. Now we have a little Dr. Pepper can here. DP, the D stands for decimals and the P stands for percents. If we're changing decimals to percents, you move the decimal place over to the right 2 places. Okay, so for example, and I like to say, so when you're moving the decimal, so here it's 62 hundredths, you have to move it 2 spaces to the right. 1, 2. Kind of looks like a butt. You draw the butt. Okay, so 1, 2, and now the decimal's behind the 2. So then this is 62%, where the decimal's right there now. Okay, here this is 5/10, but you have to move the decimal 2 spaces. So you draw the butt, 1, 2. And now here we have a little empty basket here. So what is behind this 5? There's actually a 0 behind the 5. So then when you move the decimal 2 spaces, it's behind 50, not the 5, but 50 because there's a 0 there. So the percent here would be 50% because the decimal's right there. Here, for 1 and 625 thousandths, if you have one whole, you're going to have more than 100%. Because remember, 100% is a whole. If you have more than a whole, you're going to have over 100%. But we still do the same thing. To change the decimal to percent, we move the decimal 2 spaces to the right. So again, you draw the butt, 1, 2. And you can see the decimal will be behind the 2. So then it would be 162.5% because the decimal fell behind the 2. Remember, each little hump only holds one number, okay? So that's 1, 2, and then the decimal would fall right there. So this one's going to be 162.5%. Another way to write this is 162.5%, because 0.5 is the same thing as half. Now, how do you think we change percents back to decimals? Well, if we move the decimal 2 spaces to make it a percent, well, to make a percent back into a decimal, you would move the decimal 2 spaces back to the front, right, to the left. So you would have to move the decimal place over to the left 2 places. So when we don't see, all numbers have a decimal. So when we don't see the decimal in the percent, where is it? If you don't see the decimal, it's behind the number. It's right there. So then when we move it 2 spaces back, so you draw the butt in the opposite direction. If you move it 2 spaces, it's in front of the 1, so then your decimal is 0.10, which is 10 hundredths. Another way to write this is just to do 0.1. You don't really need that 0 in the back, right? So those mean the same thing. 10 hundredths and 1/10, same thing. Here, 5%. We don't see where the decimal is, so it must be behind the 5, right? Again, you move the decimal place 2 places. So you draw the butt, 1, 2. There's an empty basket here. What do we put then? A 0. So then the decimal is really in front of the 0. So your decimal is 0.05, which is 5 hundredths. And I usually like to put a 0 in front of the decimal. So this was 10 hundredths, or 1/10, same thing, and this one's 5 hundredths, which makes sense because percents are out of 100. So if you only have 5%, it would be 5 out of 100, and this is 5 hundredths. Here we actually do see the decimal, so it'll be easy for us to move it 2 spaces back to the left. You draw the butt, and it's in front of the 1, so then this will be 0.125. Your decimal has moved from here 2 spaces this way. That is our decimal amount, and you can put a 0 there if you want. So 12.5% as a decimal is 125 thousandths. And that's how you change decimals to percents. It's always 2 places. For decimals to percents, it's 2 places to the right. You draw the butt, 2 places to the right. To change percents back to decimals, you just move the decimal back to the front 2 spaces. You draw the butt.